two young cousins who began love affairs before their age. The screams were muffled at first, but they grew louder as Ada covered her face with her hands, her small body trembling. In the dimly lit room, Tayo sat frozen, unsure of what to do. Neither of them had any idea what they had stumbled into, but it was too late. They had already started down a path no child should ever walk. Before we dive into this eye-opening story, make sure you hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel, Shar Stories. Don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support keeps us bringing tales that enlighten and entertain. Ada and Tayo were cousins, both 10 years old, and neighbors in a gated estate in Lagos, Nigeria. Their parents, who worked high-paying jobs in finance and tech, were always busy. Ada's father, Mr. Obina, spent most of his time flying between countries for business meetings, while her mother, Mrs. Amaka, was constantly attending high-profile events in shiny, revealing dresses that Ada sometimes found embarrassing. Tayo's parents, Mr. Ade and Mrs. Funmi, weren't much different. They were caught up in their own world of deadlines, parties, and social media posts. Both families had housemaids who were supposed to take care of the children. Ada's maid, Sade, was often preoccupied with soap operas on TV, while Tayo's maid, Grace, spent her days glued to her phone. Neither maid cared much about what the children did, as long as they stayed quiet. The estate was quiet during the day, with most parents at work and children at school. Ada and Tayo attended the same primary school, but after school, they were left to their own devices. Quite literally, each child had their own tablet, smartphone, and a large TV in their rooms. These gadgets, meant to keep them busy, became their world. One fateful day, Ada and Tayo discovered a folder on Tayo's tablet labeled "For Adults Only." Curious and with no one to supervise them, they opened it. What they saw left them wide-eyed and confused, but also intrigued. They didn't understand everything, but they were determined to find out. At first, they only watched out of curiosity. "Is this what grown-ups do?" Ada asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tayo shrugged. "I think so. My parents talk about this kind of stuff at night when they think I'm sleeping." Ada's eyes widened. "What do they say?" Tayo hesitated, then said, "My dad said it's normal. He told my mom that girls feel pain at first, but later enjoy it." Ada's stomach twisted. She didn't like the sound of that, but she was too embarrassed to say so. Their exploration started small, holding hands, awkward hugs, but soon they were trying to imitate what they had seen. Ada was hesitant, especially after the first attempt left her in tears. "I don't think this is right," she said, pulling away. Tayo, determined and influenced by what he had seen and heard, tried to reassure her. "Don't worry, it'll get better. My dad said so." Meanwhile, their parents were oblivious. At a dinner party one evening, Mrs. Amaka's sequin dress sparkled under the chandelier lights as she laughed at one of Mr. Ade's jokes. "Obina, you need to let loose like your friend here," she teased her husband. Obina shook his head, sipping his wine. Not everyone can afford to dress like a runway model every day, Amaka. The group laughed and the conversation shifted to work, politics, and gossip. No one mentioned their children. Back home, Sade and Grace were on the couch watching a Nigerian movie. The children were upstairs, left to their own devices again. As the days turned into weeks, Ada and Tayo's behavior began to change. They became more secretive, often whispering and avoiding eye contact with the maids. But the maids didn't notice. Sade was too engrossed in her shows, and Grace was busy chatting with her boyfriend on WhatsApp. One afternoon, after school, Ada finally spoke up. "I think we should stop, Tayo. It doesn't feel right." Tayo frowned. "Why? No one knows. It's not like we're doing anything bad." Ada's eyes filled with tears. "But it feels bad. And what if someone finds out?" Tayo hesitated, but eventually nodded. "Okay, we'll stop." But stopping wasn't as easy as it sounded. The images and videos they had watched were still in their minds, and the temptation lingered. One sleep was all it took to go back to their secret world. The turning point came one evening when Mrs. Funmi walked into Tayo's room unannounced. She had forgotten her phone charger and went to borrow Tayo's. What she saw made her drop the charger in shock. Ada and Tayo froze, their faces pale. The room was eerily silent as Mrs. Funmi stared at them, her eyes wide with disbelief. She didn't say a word. Instead, she turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. Panic set in. "What do we do?" Ada whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Tayo replied, his mind racing. When Mrs. Funmi confronted her husband that night, chaos erupted. "It's your fault," she shouted. "You're the one who's always careless with what you say around the children." Mr. Aid fired back. "And you're too busy with your parties to even notice what's going on in this house." The argument woke the entire household, including Ada's parents, who rushed over to find out what was happening. When the truth came out, the blame game intensified. Mrs. Amaka pointed at Sade. "What do we even pay you for? You were supposed to watch them." Grace wasn't spared either. "And you," Mr. Aid added, "what kind of maid are you?" The maids tried to defend themselves, but it was no use. The parents were too busy shouting at each other to listen. As the noise grew louder, Ada and Tayo sat on the stairs, listening. Tears streamed down Ada's face. "I wish we had never started this," she whispered. Tayo didn't say anything. He just stared at the floor, his heart heavy with guilt. The piercing silence in the room was broken by Ada's sudden wail. Tayo sat beside her, his own face streaked with tears, but he couldn't bring himself to comfort her. Footsteps echoed from the hallway, growing louder as their parents approached. This was it. There was no hiding anymore. Before we continue this heart-wrenching story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel, Shar Stories. Give this video a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps us bring you more stories that open minds and hearts. The confrontation that followed was explosive. Ada's father, Mr. Obina, was furious, pacing back and forth in the living room. "How could this happen under our roof?" he thundered. "We trusted you," he said, pointing at the maids. Sade, Ada's maid, looked down, unable to meet his eyes. Grace, Tayo's maid, tried to defend herself. "Sir, I swear, we didn't know." They were always in their rooms. Exactly, Mrs. Amaka interrupted. You didn't care enough to check on them. What kind of caregivers are you? The blame game continued into the night, with the parents shouting at the maids, at each other, and sometimes even at themselves. Meanwhile, Ada and Tayo sat silently in their room, the gravity of their actions sinking in deeper with every word they overheard. The next morning, both families held a tense meeting in the Obina's living room. The children were seated on one couch, their heads bowed in shame. The parents sat opposite them, their face a mix of anger, disappointment, and confusion. We need to figure out how this started, Mrs. Fumi said, her voice trembling. How did our children even know about these things? Ada's voice was barely audible when she answered. It was the videos on Tayo's tablet. The room fell silent. Mr. Adi turned to his son, his face contorted with rage. Where did you get those videos? Tayo hesitated before whispering, I found them on your tablet, Daddy. The weight of his words hit Mr. Ade like a sledgehammer. He leaned back in his chair, his hands covering his face. Mrs. Fumi's eyes filled with tears. How could you be so careless, Ade? Ade's voice was defensive. Don't put this all on me. You're the one who's always encouraging them to use these gadgets without supervision. The argument escalated again, but this time the children's voices broke through. Stop fighting! Ada cried, her tears flowing freely. It's our fault, not yours. Tayo nodded, his voice choked. We're sorry, we didn't know it would cause so much trouble. The families decided it was time to make changes. Not just for the children, but for themselves as well. The first step was to remove all electronic devices from the children's rooms. Tablets, phones, and TVs were locked away, accessible only under parental supervision. Next, the parents agreed to attend counseling sessions as families. They needed to rebuild trust and learn how to communicate better, both with each other and with their children. The maids were retained but given strict instructions to monitor the children closely and report any unusual behavior. Ada and Tayo's daily routines changed drastically. Instead of spending hours on their gadgets, they were enrolled in extracurricular activities. Ada took up painting, while Tayo joined a local football team. These activities not only kept them busy, but also helped them develop new skills and friendships. Months passed, and the wounds began to heal. The families grew closer, their bonds strengthened by the ordeal they had endured together. The children slowly regained their parents' trust, and the parents learned to be more present in their lives. One evening, as the two families gathered for dinner, Mr. Obina raised his glass. To new beginnings, he said, smiling at his family. The others echoed his toast, their faces reflecting a mix of relief and hope. The journey had been painful, but it had also been a wake-up call. They had been given a second chance, and they were determined not to waste it. Ada and Tayo's story is a sobering reminder of the dangers of neglect and the consequences of exposing children to adult conversations and content. It's a call for parents to take an active role in their children's upbringing, to monitor their activities, and to ensure they grow up in a safe and nurturing environment. Remember, children learn more from what we do than what we say. Let's be the role models they need. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this emotional journey. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to Shar Stories, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue to learn and grow together through the power of storytelling.